Hey review family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, the review guy, reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one I'm going to be covering the new Pig Destroyer EP entitled The Octagonal Stairway. The Virginian grindcore band Pig Destroyer are back. Whether or not you are a fan of their most recent output or not, you can't deny that Pig Destroyer had one of the most flawless runs in the 2000s and was such a leading force in the grindcore scene that I would go as far as to say that when it comes to 2000s bands, or bands that came about in the late 90s, early 2000s, they really were the main grindcore band, with aggression and ferocity that was able to go toe-to-toe with some of the bands from the past that were both still at large and creating some very hard music. Prowler in the Yard remains to be one of the best grindcore records and most essential grindcore records, period. Now, one thing is, I was not a stranger to my dislike of Headcage, their 2018 record, and I wasn't that big of a fan of their 2012 record, Bookburner. Both of their 2010 studio-length albums, in my opinion, just read to me as if they were going much more into a mosh-heavy, riff-heavy direction, and lost a lot of the tenacity that they boasted on their early releases, specifically Prowler in the Yard. The vocals were changing, the production was changing. It sounded larger, and it sounded like it had more of a heavier production style, but something was missing from the original formula that made them so energetic and scary to listen to. Headcage, in my opinion, seemed like a one-dimensional extreme metal and death metal record with very little of the grindcore influences that were on their initial material. Surely they were playing at very fast speeds, but the riff writing was some of their weakest. And yes, while Pig Destroyer did do short song lengths, there was something that was pretty electric about what they were doing on their initial material. In 2020, though, we have a brand new EP, but don't sell this EP short. It is 25 minutes, which is only 5 minutes shy of their studio-length album, Headcage. I wanted to leave the past in the past when it came to their past two records and examine this on its own to hopefully like this more than those, but I will say, I was very weary stepping into this. A part of me couldn't help but be skeptical. Surely it still has some of the just mosh-heavy, riff-heavy moments that just feel very one-dimensional, kind of like Headcage fell into. The pitfalls that took that record down a pedestal, they still appear here on this record, just not nearly as often, not in as many moments. And this feels much more like just some very heavy, chunky grindcore straight away from the first track. A lot of the gang vocals here remind me a lot of what Barney Greenway from Napalm Death does. These hardcore punk-esque, shouted, shrieked type of vocals. You're not really getting growls. The very piercing, throaty sound of, say, Prowler in the Yard era Pig Destroyer is pretty much gone. But I will be honest, even though the production is very different and there is more of a focus on riff-heavy compositions, there are moments that call back to their initial material. The sample News Channel 6 reminds me of something that would have been on Prowler in the Yard. While the riffs are just very buff and hard, they still do have some flavor to them as opposed to what they did on Headcage. The Octagonal Stairway feels like the most logical step from Headcage back to their roots without forsaking what they were progressing on in Headcage. Now, while the first tracks are extremely primal and feel somewhat like Pig Destroyer returning to their roots in a very strong way, the last three tracks, beginning with News Channel 6, is where this record turns into something else entirely and kind of goes downhill. So News Channel 6, it's just a little sample interlude type of thing. But then they have a track called Headcage, which basically is this soupy, slurpy, drum hit-led interlude after an interlude, and it only lasts 2 minutes, very forgettable. So I mostly want to focus on Soundwalker. 11 minutes, 9 seconds. You would think that this is like a progressive odyssey. This is very odd to digest. It is this synth-led, electronic-heavy, ominous and eerie, Victorian-sounding sound piece that just rings out and continues to go on and on, gets you in a lull. It feels like a fever dream. If there was a window at the end of a long corridor in a mansion, there'd be lightning striking. I'll give it to Pig Destroyer on this track. They do a good job of building the atmosphere of feeling really freakish and off kilter, but something about this track just is not hitting as it progresses. There are some times, don't get me wrong on it, where it just reaches these intense peaks and plateaus that I just feel like they can't go higher and higher and they can't swell it anymore, but they do. And I'm a big fan of like dungeon synth and things that incorporate a lot of that electronic and synth atmosphere. Dark synth sounds amazing, and I would classify this and categorize it as dark synth, but Pig Destroyer I feel like are really pushing the length further when they were doing something really good on the first 3 tracks, and then they decided to just kind of take it off the rails. And the last half is definitely the section that suffers the most, because I'm conflicted. The first 3 tracks are all tracks that I would return to, that I think are a really great statement going forward for Pig Destroyer. Really makes me hope that they continue to build on this and sort of go more in that direction where they don't get rid of either influence. They just take the death metal influence of Headcage and merge it with the heavy, fast grindcore playing of their initial material. And then on the other hand, you have the back half, which I believe suffers quite a bit due to some odd experimental choices. I respect the ambition, but the intrigue factor kind of is lost very quickly, as it's nothing that is super boundary pushing. And I guess while we're on the topic of that, the 3 tracks that are really good are not boundary pushing. By Pig Destroyer standards, by grindcore standards. The piercing distortion that comes through, the grimy bass at times, the insanely heavy drums. It sort of sounds like a Misery Index record. The vocals are very throaty, Napalm Death-esque. The production is very in your face, very blunt, bash your head in, which is not that uncommon for modern day grindcore and specifically death grind bands. The riff writing isn't the most stellar that they've ever had. I could go on about how this record isn't boundary pushing, but it doesn't have to be for it to just be a good record that's enjoyable to listen to. And for the most part, for the first half, it is really good, and I suggest it. Overall, though, I just hope that these ambitious ideas can be fleshed out more and not just be so in your face with the experimentation and maybe slide in nicely with everything else that they're doing. It excites me for a future studio-length album from the band and what they're going to do. So I don't think this should discourage anyone from checking this EP out, and especially the rest of their discography. I do suggest it nonetheless. For me, I'm going to be giving this EP a 6 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Pig Destroyer EP, the Octagonal Stairway? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss this record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, the Review Guy. I'm signing off saying farewell.